those things, which I can't remember. But you have to actually write something that's doable. You can't just say, oh, I promise to be more careful. That's not good enough. There's a very obvious overlap here with those of you that I'm sure you're familiar with the Lean School of Engineering, the CMMI level 5 kind of maturity level requirements for process improvement. Same thing with Six Sigma styles of engineering, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's a very obvious overlap with those schools of thought here. But this is just doing it at a personal level, which is really interesting. So some results and impressions based on what we've done. As far as I'm concerned, it's probably the best training in engineering that I've ever been on, given all of my years at university and whatever, and working with practice. This is, and I say engineering training, and I mean engineering. This is not a course about programming. It's not about how to write code in language X. That's not what it's about. It's about how to behave like an engineer. And I was never taught that at university, which is a bit worrying. There are universities that teach this, but none in the UK, which is a bit of a worry. Perhaps we should try to change that. Secondly, it works. These are good news. Every single person on the course, certainly when I was on, everybody improved their behaviour and their performance during the length of the course, no matter how good they were to start with. Even, you know, the real so-called gurus or the hero programmers, the people who think they're really good, first discovery, you're not as good as you think you are. That's a big sort of sobering moment for software engineers. You're not as clever as you think you are. No one is. Secondly, there's always room for improvement for everybody, and that's a powerful discovery. Thirdly, this is very important. When we try and get people on the, to talk about, taking on the idea of something like Spark, we often hear people say, oh, that wouldn't work for us. People say, we wouldn't work for us because we're special, or, oh, it wouldn't work for us. Well, you can't say that about PSP. You can't say it wouldn't work for me, because it is you. Your own data and your own control experiment is staring you in the face on the screen, on the spreadsheet, and you can't deny it wouldn't work. You can't say, oh, that wouldn't, So it's a very powerful thing to discover. Another interesting discovery, most so-called software engineers or programmers pretty badly trained in statistics. I certainly skipped it at A-level. I did mechanics, right? Because I was interested, mechanics stuff seemed easier than stats and probability. So I didn't do stats at school. And I came onto this course not really understanding what a correlation was, let alone a standard deviation or a multiple regression or any of this stuff we're supposed to usefully know. So it's surprising to find most people on the course really weren't that well trained in basic statistics, which is, again, a bit worrying about the education system. Thanks, Andy. There is great emphasis in PSP on static verification, with mostly, though, an emphasis on the use of review, human-driven review using checklists. And don't get me wrong, human-driven review is still, to this day, probably the most powerful form of verification that we have. It is extremely effective if you can find that sweet spot of productivity and review rate using a good checklist. It is very, very powerful. But we found that the contribution of tool-supported static verification was basically undervalued by the guys that designed PSP because they'd only ever seen a tool like Lint, a very lightweight kind of tool static analysis system. They had never seen anything like Spark. And that was one thing that surprised them when I did the training, perhaps. So that's what I did. I used Spark. The result, well, it worked even better. My injection rate was very low, and my rate at finding and discovering the bugs was very high, which I guess you'd expect. We haven't published that data because it's not a statistically significant set of data. It's just me, basically, so far. The only data set we've got is for Rod. So we can't publish that yet because there's all, it's not a big enough set of data to be meaningful. So we hope to overcome that barrier soon by training some more people. If you want to know more, I recommend Watts' book, PSP, A Self-Improvement Process. It's a very interesting read, very well written, very fluent book, and very nice to read about this process. The website, me as a PSP instructor, and soon my colleague Ian O'Neill, who you may have met today. Ian is also at present going through the training process. He's just finished the second week of the training program. He's got one more to go to become an instructor. So soon we'll have 2 instructors in the business. What we're intending to do next is to start to roll this out internally within the business so we can train more of our colleagues in PSP and these ideas of personal process. In the long run, we hope to be able to actually bring this out to industry as well so that we don't just teach people internally, we can actually bring this training course to, for example, yourselves, people in the room. If you're interested in it, we can come and tell you about it and actually offer it as a sort of part of our training portfolio, I suppose. I do commend it to you. It's very interesting to find out more about, and it's perhaps sadly under-recognised in the UK at the moment, but hopefully we can change that given a few more years and a lot more people trained. So that's what I had for you today. Thanks for listening. Are there any questions?